for me. Wonderful. So first of all, I think it's important to introduce ourselves. So if you are here, you're here because you are joining and attending the Decolonization in Practice conference that is being held by Birmingham Guild of Students in collaboration with NUS. And this event is the Grasping at the Roots Decolonization in Practice panel event with some amazing panelists tonight. I'm Hilary. I am the Vice President Higher Education at the National Union of Students, and my pronouns are she, her. And I am really, really glad to be welcoming you all to this event where you'll be hearing just so much fruitful, energizing, important information about how we can do decolonization in practice. So just so we can get me speaking out of the way and get to our fabulous panelists, I'm going to introduce all of our panelists one by one, let them say hi, and then we'll get right into it. So the first panelist I get to introduce is our wonderful, fabulous, beautiful National President, Larissa Kennedy, who is going to be joining our panel tonight. Larissa, say hi.
Hi, Hilary. Thank you so much for introducing me. Yeah, as you said, I have the joy and privilege of being NUS President, and I'm just really, really excited for this panel and to talk about really grasping at the root of structural injustice and structural anti-Blackness and racism. So thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you so much for being here. And like, if you ever hear me saying a quote, it's come from Larissa, who's read something, and it's come from the person that she's read. So if I've ever got a quote, Larissa, TM, and then the person. The next person, the next person that I am so honored to introduce you all to is Fauzia from Kids of Color, and they are joining our panel today as well. Fauzia, do you want to say hi?
Hi, thanks, Hilary. Yes, my name is Fauzia. I'm really, really excited for this panel discussion. Yeah, really looking forward to it.
Lovely to have you here, Fauzia. And last but certainly not least, we've got Shayan, who is the president at Durham SU. Shayan, do you want to say hi and let everyone see your wonderful face?
Yes, last but not least, I'm going to hyper-emphasize that. I'm joking. Hi, everyone. I'm Shayan Twins from Durham. I know I'm from Durham. It's hard to believe. Yeah, and I'm just really excited to have this conversation because we've been having it in Durham, but it's nice to engage on a national level. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we've got lots of things, lots of conversations and questions lined up for you tonight. So we've got some pre-prepared questions as well, and then we'll move on to a Q&A a little bit later. But before we go into the panel talk, we are going to have a 5-minute introductory sort of setting the scene from each of our panelists. And I'm going to start with Larissa, who is going to start us off with setting the scene for Deco and speaking about it in the wider context and also in how NUS is working on it. So Larissa, over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, you know, I'm really excited to start unpacking what we're talking about when we say decolonization, because, you know, those of us who've been in this space for a while may have seen that, you know, this conversation is often diluted, it's often co-opted. And yeah, so let's get into it, because at NUS, when we talk about decolonization, we're consistently asking ourselves and holding ourselves to account with what it means to maintain the kind of inherently radical nature of this work. And that really takes us back to the words of Angela Davis when she says radical simply means grasping things at the root. And I guess that gets us to ask the question, how do we as students grasp at the root of structural anti-Blackness, structural racism, oppression, injustice through our work? How do we build a movement capable of doing that? Because it's about recognizing that so many of the issues that we as Black students face are mere symptoms of a decade of austerity, 2 decades of the failed project of marketization and institutions built on centuries of historical genocide, enslavement, displacement, colonialism, the list goes on. And so we're taking on some pretty hefty topics. Like, it's not a 1-2 day campaign, it's not even a 1-2 year campaign. But I really do feel that, you know, we've seen this zeitgeist moment around really students seeing their power in talking about racism and anti-racism. And we're kind of faced with a once in a generation opportunity, I feel, to capture the hearts and minds of students to empower other Black students, Black and brown students into this feeling that we really can grasp at the root. But before I keep repeating grasp at the root, because I say that all day long, I could talk about that all day long. That is my current catchphrase, but before that was my catchphrase, my OG catchphrase was turning anger into action. And I feel a lot of anger right now. You know, students have been through a lot, particularly Black students have been through a lot. You know, we saw universities giving out empty platitudes saying Black Lives Matter with little behind those words. We've seen the impacts of anti-Black police brutality play out not only in the US, but here, Brazil, all across the world. And of course now we turn our hearts and our thoughts and prayers to our siblings in Nigeria who are going through it in the most visceral sense. But of course, a microcosm of that, we're seeing, you know, anti-Blackness happen in the hyper-securitization of the student lockdowns in kind of recent months. You know, all of this is building this collective anger, and how do we move that into a place of action? And that kind of really, I keep going back to the words of Akwugo Emejulu, who's a Black woman academic who I've had the honor of hearing speak a lot of times. She's actually at Warwick, which is where I study. And she said this, I'm going to read it just so I don't misappropriate her words. She said, "We scream, we shout, and we march because we are haunted by those we could not save and by the terrifying knowledge that these violent deaths at the hands of the state or those who know they have the full support of the state could happen to any of us." And I think that's not just true for anti-Black police brutality. I feel it's true for all of the forms of violence that we face as Black folks. And so when we're talking about truly being anti-racist and truly grasping at the root, it's about recognizing that all of the things that we're experiencing is that there is a kindred between what we're experiencing here as, you know, students in the UK really navigating, in many cases, overwhelmingly white institutions, overwhelmingly racist institutions, but also the experiences of our siblings all across the world who are also navigating, wherever it is, an inherently white academy. And I think it's really important that we mention and speak to how internationalist this movement is and needs to be. So, you know, before I end, because I feel like I've been speaking for a while, I'm not sure how long, and I'm not sure how long I have left, but one thing I do want to leave people with is this quote that I really love when we're talking about decolonization and grasping at the root, because I'm quite obsessed with the concept of dreaming and the ways that that pushes us to do better and to be better and to go beyond what we think is possible. And I'm gonna just give this quote that I love to go back to. It says, "On the day empire comes crashing down, the sun will wake to crumbling walls, prison doors will swing open, the skies will cheer, lands will be returned to indigenous peoples, colonial institutions will rot, and nation states will decay, landlords will be evicted and vacant homes will be filled, genders will be as varied as the flowers, and oceans will breathe a sigh of relief. Abundant days are on their way." And if we are working from a place of abundance, if we are moving in this conceptualization of decolonization from a place of abundance, then we are limitless. And that is the beauty of what we get to talk about today and the work that we get to do. And I'm going to leave it there, but thank you so much for listening to the intro. And I'm excited to hear from the rest of our panelists.
I don't know about anybody else here. I've got goosebumps. I feel like I have the privilege of working with Larissa every day, and it never changes that anytime I hear her speak and speak about how passionate she is about decolonization and how that really runs through how important it is to decolonize. I always get goosebumps. So I'm going to be getting a lot of this today. I can feel it. And so that leads us perfectly on to Fozia, who's going to give us a little introduction into your thoughts and feelings on the importance of decolonization and how that comes about from your perspective. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hilary. And yes, that was very powerful, Larissa. I'm very gassed. Don't know how I'll do after that, but you know, I'm gonna try. So my name is Fozia, and I'm one of the project officers for Kids of Color. And yes, decolonization is one major kind of concept that comes up daily for us as we work with young people of color, especially in the education sector of things. And we see it in different variations. We see it with their interpersonal relationships with their teachers and how they're treated, and then within the curriculum and what they're taught and the lives that they stand. So for me, I think it's extremely important to decolonize all these different aspects, because it really affects these young people and how they internalize who they are, the world that they live in, the fact that they're invisible in a society that they visibly exist in. So that's the main kind of role in Kids of Color that we've been working on lately, especially because we work with young people of color, because we work in school settings mainly of the time. And two main like structures that come up that are issues for us is teacher training and curriculum. The curriculum is massively a lie most of the time, especially historically speaking. And you can see really the effects that it has on the identity of these young kids of color, predominantly Black children, as they face a lot of negative stigmas and stereotypes from their staff, from their teachers, sorry. And it's a difficult position for them to be in as well, because you're taught that, you know, you respect your teachers, you go into these spaces, they know best for you, they're not here to harm you. You don't really think that there would be such biases and racism that would come from them. But then when you speak to these young people of color, when you speak to young Black girls and how they're treated, how they're isolated, how they're affected, it all comes from colonial references. So I'm really excited to dive into this. I'm really excited to see how these conversations go and the impacts that it will have, and continue the decolonizing of all of this.
Yeah, I think those reflections are really, really important. So thank you so much, Fozia. I think it's important, especially in thinking about how big this project is. It's not just a university problem, and it's not just sort of individualistic. It's about the whole system. And I think knowing how alive and how prevalent that is, like today and ongoing, is really important to put all of this into perspective for everybody here listening. Which leads us on to, I'm going to say it again, last but certainly not least, Sheum, who's going to talk about it from the university perspective, and hopefully these reflections will continue to give that context and perspective needed to really understand this big project.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, I'm trying to hide my smile because I just love Black women so much. So thank you guys for just being phenomenal for the sake of it. Like, I just love that. So yeah, I was kind of so again, I'm president of Durham Students Union, and it's a lot easier to engage in the academic side of how to decolonize and decolonizing curriculum in Durham than it is to incorporate students of color's experiences, because of, number one, the demographics are a lot more skewed, which means that our voice is already diluted in of itself, but also the only way that I have seen to engage white people, lack of a better term, in anti-racist work is through books or through academia, which is a shame because it reduces our experience just to textbooks. But I also think it's a good way for them to disarm them, I guess, in that perspective. So I was asked to answer the question, how are British universities colonial spaces in themselves? And I thought the question itself was quite peculiar for like rudimentary decolonization discourse, and therefore I found the question quite superior, somewhat superior, because it disseminates the task of introspection, not just to the agents and the perpetrators, but to all of us that occupy that space and all of us that have that are adjacent to that space. So it democratizes responsibility, I guess, and I think that's really important. And it also demands us to, I don't know, take a more phenomenological, experiential approach to decoloniality, rather than, centralizing how to get more Black and brown people in reading books that still propagate neocolonialism, colonialism, capitalism, and neoliberalism, right? So they always say, like, if you slap like someone from a different gender, or slap somebody from like a different race or whatever onto books that are still inherently violent, it doesn't dilute the violence, it just sells it in a way that's a bit more nefarious, if anything. So I think it's just about looking at it from a more like, what is palpable, what is tangible, what is real, and what is unreal, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So how are British universities colonial spaces? I think it's a really obvious way to direct that conversation if we start with Rhodes Must Fall and the movement in South Africa, and how once decolonization entered into British universities, how the conversation was bastardized because white people were able to divorce the revolutionary spirit from it and bastardize it into a meal that was a bit less violent from their perspective. So my advice to people who are trying to come from it from an academic space is to not be afraid and not have anxieties about using violent language to talk about violent things. So we like to, you know, our vice chancellors like to call diversification instead of decolonization, or people, heads of HR like to say EDI or respect, or, you know, how to treat each other like it's a workplace, rather than just say, no, the books that you're giving me inherently deny my existence, not only deny my existence, but say my existence should never have been there in the first place. So I think for us as students, and I think we've got the privilege of being in higher education and the privilege of academia, is that let's use the language that is as violent as the experience that we had. And that is where the phenomenological approach comes in, where we can incorporate capitalism, we can incorporate classism, we can incorporate, you know, the ills of the transnational corporate class and all that stuff, and we can create something that is a bit more holistic. So it's not palatable to the white man, but the white man can understand it from a perspective that is not just black and white. And I think when we get into those black and white conversations, what we are doing is that we are just engaging in a very rudimentary conversation about what we're talking about. Decolonization and anti-racism, although they're sisters, or although they're brothers and although they're family, they're very different. And you see how white people enter anti-racism conversations, you see how they enter decolonization conversations, and they're very different. White people love to enter anti-racism conversations like apologetically, to be like, I didn't know, or I'll post a black square and all that stuff. When they come into decolonization, it's like, okay, cool, so everybody just read Edward Said. It's like, okay, but all of us have read Edward Said, so where are we going now? What are we doing from this? What have I graduated with? What are we encouraged? How do we encourage people of color to enter the social and political sciences? Like, it's a bit more holistic than A, B, and C historically. And what I would argue is that all the dilutions, all the bastardizations, all the misdirections are all intentional. And it's to fractionalize a movement that is actually solely rooted in academia, the phenomenology of violence, political philosophy. So I think that's my thoughts on that. It's very highbrow, so I apologize, but I think the only way that I can access this conversation from the space that I'm in is through the books that I see as violent. And yeah, I think that's my point on that.
I think that was so brilliant. Everything everyone said was brilliant, but I think really thinking about, you know, we're tackling what we know is the issue of the colonial legacy persisting and pervading not only the academic sphere but our world. And I think it's important that when we look at it, first of all, we call it for what it is, and we tackle it as what it is. And so everything you said was right on it. And I think for everybody here listening to these opening statements, these opening context builders, I'm going to call them, it's important that you understand that the perspective we're coming from is a perspective of actual revelation and ongoing revelation to the ongoing impact and the ongoing living sort of manifestations of how colonial legacy, how racial violence continue to plague the world we live in today. And so opening up the panel into this conversation, I always think about decolonization in general, but I always think about it, especially in my own journey and in my own reckoning with what decolonization is in its truest sense. I think about it as a journey, and I think it's important that we recognize that decolonization is a journey in not only looking at the manifestation of us doing the work of decolonization and going into dismantling and uprooting and challenging those spaces and the institutions and the systems that continue to promote and enable the colonial legacy to persist. But I also think that journey is really, really important when we think about our own personal journeys with decolonization and what that's meant for us as individuals and how it's influenced the work that we're doing today. And so I know that all of Black History Month has been, you know, a month of us being talked to, talking about our own experiences with race and how does it feel like to be Black in white institutions. So I'm not going to ask you that tonight. Instead, I want to ask you more about this journey that you're on right now, with decolonization. What is your decolonization journey? How have you come to the space and place you are today? And what has that meant for what you believe and know about decolonization? I don't know if in and of itself is a good way to end that sentence, but I'm going to say it in and of itself. So I'm going to go with Fozia first. And if you need clarification, let me know. But The floor is yours.
No, thank you. And I completely agree with you. I feel exactly the same, especially the position I am now in my 20s and where I was as a teenager are two very different spaces in these contexts. And thinking of the question, it's complicated in the sense of the fact that it feels very personal when you individualize it for yourself, right? It's very difficult to understand contexts from your experiences in high school, for example, and realize what that means. For me, a lot of the times of situations that I was in, it was very blameful to myself. You know, there was something wrong with me if I didn't do this, and that was the relation. So in my unlearning journey and having all these questions, looking back is not the easiest of experiences. It's very separate to talking about racism in, you know, general context or education or something where you can, although it's emotional, you can separate yourself from it in a context to when you're talking about yourself and your experiences and why you experienced certain things and difficulties that you face, and the fact that you wouldn't have faced them had you not been the skin color that you are and the race that you are and the history that represents. So it's still a journey. I think it will be a journey till like I die. And I think it's part of the growth and development of myself, but also the impact that will have with my interaction with young people or my work experiences, or how I communicate and how I take spaces that isn't supposed to be for me. And it started off with me with my name. I used to have a lot of problems with teachers like mispronouncing my name. So then I decided to call myself Fo, and I was like, I thought it was cool and it was my choice. And I went to a predominantly white college, and it was really uncomfortable for me to be learning these very complicated Eurocentric kind of names, and then my name no one could pronounce. And looking back and reflecting on that, I was going through that process and I was thinking about it, and I realized that even the idea that I told myself that it was my choice, it really wasn't. It was a choice that I was making because I was in an incredibly uncomfortable environment as a young person, trying to make it as comfortable as possible it could be for me. And then now I will repeat it 3 million times if I have to. I will not accept, you know, interviewees or anyone in any position to mispronounce my name. And it's like, it's not just getting a name wrong or finding it difficult, which is what I was told or what I was made to believe, or to take that responsibility on. It was the lack of respect, the fact that it wasn't worthy enough to know my name, and why it was like a power over that it's not important, therefore we won't try. You actually conform to our way if you want to be in this space. So it was kind of that started. I had a lot of questions growing up, and it was very difficult growing up in a house where I come from a second generation, I'm a second generation immigrant, and I live in a Somali household, and there was this duality of like, at 1 minute at home, I have all this culture, I have all this, like my mother has such confidence and is this like amazing Black woman, and then outside I was like someone completely different who had to like find a way and navigate through these systems, and I couldn't understand why. And because of that, and because of the questions, and I find it very hard to just accept things as they are because we're supposed to, because that doesn't answer any of my questions. And then through that came a lot of communal relationships and communities, and meeting all these people and meeting other peoples from the diaspora who had the same questions and the same experiences. And then you're not alone, and then it's not a you thing anymore, there's a bigger issues. And it was really through those experiences where the sort of self-acknowledgement started, which then the journey of decolonizing myself and my thoughts and unlearning all the things that I was told, and then reading academic books and, you know, Black historians, Black intellects, and Black creatives. And it's like we exist in so many different ways, in so many different contexts, and we actually practically made the world that we live in. And I felt so empowered. Like I remember reading Malcolm X's book for the first time, and I was like, oh my God. And, you know, it opened this floodgates of I knew there was something not wrong, there was something missing. And it really started this wave of like having more questions, having more answers. And then from the space of being a Black woman in this society, but then also my ethnicity as a Somali woman and what that means, what that represents, the culture that I come from, and having this connection with my homeland, even though I wasn't born then, I was born in the Western world. Looking at my mom in awe of like, you know, she has this sense of self that was kind of missing for me and my siblings and a lot of my friends, because we were born in this Western country, but actually that doesn't mean we don't belong there, but meaning that we come from two spaces that we are from and we deserve. Reclaiming my language, because I used to whisper on the bus, and now I'm like as loud as the auntie that we see all the time, just to prove a point for like my younger self who used to be ashamed. And so it was through, you know, these relationships and interactions and these questions, and just not feeling okay that this journey began, and it's still a journey to this day. And one of the main things that I found in myself and through communications with friends and other people that I've met who have had similar experiences is learning to forgive myself for being a young person and for being innocent and for being naive. And that because this is part of what I was saying of like, it's difficult because, you know, you look back and like, oh, I should have never been ashamed, or I should have never done that. I should have never changed my name. I should have, you know, like I find a lot of times we tend to punish ourselves for things that we were being punished for. And I think that that's also part of decolonizing all of these different aspects. So I went on for a little bit, but that's generally the standard of what I was trying to say. But thank you.
No, I think that was perfect. I think we can all resonate with things you said in there. I definitely resonate with you talking about this duality of like, in your home you existed in one space and in one culture, and outside you were reckoning with a whole other culture that you knew and understood. And I always tell people that, like, at home I was raised in Ghana. As far as I'm concerned, at home my passport is Ghanaian, and as soon as I leave the house I'm British. Like, that's the two realities. And so everything you said really hit home for that. And I think it really speaks to your own personal journey of decolonization, not only as a practice but as a mindset and as a finding of self and identity. And I think that was really powerful in what you said. So next I'm going to go to Shayon, just because you're below Fozia on my screen, and it will be good to see what your journey has been and how you've come to where you are today with Decol.
Yeah, so Fozia was like completely excellent, and I think what I'm going to say is not the right answer, but it's the true answer, I guess. So like Hilary spoke about, like, in your home you're Ghanaian, but outside the door you're British. But for me, I was constantly British in every space I was in, but just like the wrong type of British, if that makes sense. So for me, my journey of decolonization is very much rooted in academia. It's very much rooted in political science. Like, it's very much rooted, like, in Malcolm X, I was looking at it from the perspective of like the Muslim perspective and what happens when you've got that intersect of religion, like, so. And I think it's because my parents are not academics, but, well, they think they're academics, but my parents are just ridiculous people anyway. So like, I was forced to engage from the perspective of how best could I display this argument. So when I talk about decolonize, I think it's quite interesting that it's a personal question, because I don't really have a personal perspective of decolonize at all. Like, I don't centralize myself in it. When I talk about decolonize, I'm very detached. Like, I don't use personal pronouns. Like, I don't engage in it because it's a very toxic, like, Nigerian mentality. But like, there are certain hills that I'm not going to die on, and the hills that I choose to not die on are hills to do with myself. Do you know what I mean? Like, you have to protect yourself in spaces of this where you're actually talking about explicit violence. So when you talk about like mass genocide, slavery, indigenous, like femicide, all these things, if I constantly put myself in that conversation, then I'll be debilitated. So you talk about like your name and like, so my name is Shion, my name is Oluwaseun, Hassana Oluwaseun twins, right? And like from very early, I think from 5 years old, I realized that, is this, like my mom told me, is this a hill you're gonna die on? Like, do you have the energy for this? Because I had the energy to be like, no, you'll say my name, this one syllable, you'll say it, you'll come correct, but then also I realized that like, I don't have the energy to keep telling people who are actively mispronouncing my name. And that's what it was. I think I've infused a pessimism into my perspective, especially of white people, where I realized that the only way you're going to listen to me is if I present my argument in a way that you can't deny. So if I say that you're actively being obtuse, I know that I'm already invested in that, and I'm too invested in that, and it's something that I'm more likely going to leave crying than leave like, you know what, I presented what I was going to present, and if they took it or not, that's on them, that's not on me. And it's probably very problematic. And I think my journey goes from, there were more hills I wanted to die on, and then less and less I've changed the hills. So now I'm like, I'm not going to die on my name, but I'll definitely die on intersectionality and Black women. Facts, 100% pro more than anything else. There are other hills that I'm like, okay, cool. So like recently we were talking about Nigeria and diaspora and our involvement in it. And that was a conversation that I had to have on myself to be like, okay, cool. How best do I engage in this conversation that is best for everybody else to receive what I'm saying, but also for my own humanity? Because I think in this activism, in this activist world, we love to sacrifice ourselves for the greater goal. And that's something that I'm not willing to do, because there are so many other forces that are trying to come and kill me. I shouldn't be one of those self-inflicting forces. So my name, I hold so precious to me. I hold it so dearly that I'm not going to engage in conversations with people who I know that like, my name was already in public consumption. The fact that you don't know how to say my name at 22, that's a you problem. That's not a me problem at all. And I think it's a learning about like, what are you problems, what are me problems, or what are collective problems, or what collective issues, to the point where I feel very Malcolm X-ish, like, just call myself X-twins, like just be like, guys, it's a placeholder for the imperialism that you want to come and kill, rather than being like, so basically my name means, you know, give God thanks. It's like, I don't have time to now give you the history of my people that you actually tried to kill. I'd rather focus on the violence. Like, I'd rather focus on this. So I think my personal journey is weird because I have to keep it private. And if I don't keep it private, then I've sacrificed myself, not to the movement, to the people who are trying to diminish me because I'm in that movement. That makes sense. And it's a very weird, complex way to answer that, but it's a conversation, it's a resolution that I've made with myself from day, like, and it's probably very problematic. And sometimes I'm always like, all right, cool. So for the Nigerians in the room, my name is Shion. For anybody else, just do A, B, and C. That's it. We've got the parameters. All right, cool. Let's talk about slavery. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I can't centralize myself in it because I'm actually not the most important one. And my personal tears are not as important as you understanding. I'm talking about decoloniality. And it's probably very problematic, and it's probably the best way for people to talk about it is start with the name, or start with this and start with this. But I think my perspective is so macro and so political science and so like structural that if I place myself in it, I can't place myself in the structure, if that makes sense. So it's very odd, and it's probably very sad and traumatic, but that is the route that I've decided to go down. Ask me again in 10 years, I might be like, no, I walk in the room and I say, my name is Chakras or something, whatever my name is. But yeah, that's my answer.
No, thank you for that. And I think what's actually really interesting is that like how you reflect on it being somewhat problematic, you not being prepared to die on certain hills. Like for me, it reminds me of I was at a talk actually recently with Taiwo from Free Black Uni, and yeah, and he was talking a lot about radical self-care in that space. And like from what I've heard from you, that sounds like it's got so many elements, if not like the elements that make up radical self-care, especially for Black people in this space. I mean, like I think whenever people see Black people, especially in spaces where we're tackling racial inequality, when we're tackling racism, let's call it what it is, when we are going to fight on that journey for decolonization, I think people expect us to go there to be the martyrs of the movement and then like keep it stepping. And like honestly, you like people, like they've already killed our people, they can't come and kill us. Like it's too much. And so like everything you're saying sounds like radical self-care, and I think it's really important that reflection is personal, but it's personal in a way that doesn't compromise your own self-care to yourself. Which brings me on to Larissa. and I've heard your journey before, but I think it's going to be so great to hear what your journey is, especially reflecting off of the two journeys we've just heard now.
Wow, yeah, I don't even know where to start because I feel like both of those answers were so beautiful in their own ways. And you know, my journey, I can't speak to myself posited within decolonization, but what I can speak to is how I began to learn and kind of like unpack and do kind of work around decolonization. And for me, like I can literally at every turning point for me where I can look back and be like, wow, like I feel like I grew there, or you know, I grew as an activist, I grew as an organizer. At every single point, I can pinpoint a Black feminist who pushed me, who poured into me, who was part of that. And just, I feel so grateful to have been in collective spaces that have forced me to keep dreaming. And anyone who knows me knows I talk about dreaming all day long. Because I think dreaming is one of the most powerful forms of resistance that we have, like the world that we live in, this like hyper-capitalist, complete, just it forces us to think in a certain way that will never align with what freedom and what liberation is for us. And so I think dreaming is so important, and just the people who have created the spaces that have kind of regularized my opportunities to dream. I'm just, those are the people that I think have really pushed my thinking around decolonization. And someone the other day called me a thinker. I was like, I don't think I'm a thinker, but if I can call myself a thinker for these purposes, I think that's what it's kind of pushed me to do and to be. And I think we each play a role in the movement in decolonization, and that doesn't always look the same. All of it, when we're talking about kind of uprooting and the violence of this work and all of it, like it plays out in different ways. You know, each of us has to bring the tools that we have at our disposal to chip away and to keep chipping away at this kind of this constructed blockage to our liberation. But I think that absolutely looks different for different people. And you know, like for me, it really has been about organizing work and student organizing work. And you know, I guess the turning point for me was founding the Warwick Decolonise Project, and seeing my role in that space as, you know, creating a sustainable organizing space for students to actually be remunerated for the work of decolonization. Because what I was seeing, I guess, in my journey was students, Black students predominantly, constantly putting time and energy into decolonization work. On top of having to do part-time jobs, on top of care and responsibilities, on top of all these other things that we're managing and handling. And so in that point of my journey, I was like, there ain't no way I'm leaving this space until these students are getting paid. And that's, you know, of course, that's just one tiny part of the work. But I knew that that's what I saw as the next step on my journey, was being able to set that up for the students that came after me. And you know, so much of, you know, when we see like the cyclical nature of student organizing, and you know, the universities playing us off against one another, and they see our journeys, and they see, oh, they're coming in at this stage, they're going to ask for this, then we're going to push that to the side, we're going to brush it under the carpet until this point, and then they leave. And then we start all over again, act brand new, as if we didn't know what's going on. And so I at each point of, you know, seeing that journey, because, you know, I did my first 2 years as a student, then I was a SAB, then I was on placement, and now I'm doing this. So it's a bit of a weird journey. But at each point I tried to say, how can I negotiate with the institutions that I'm within right now, or the spaces that I'm in right now, to extract what I can to serve the movement. And so I kind of see the journey in that way. I can literally see, okay, at this point, I had these tools in my toolbox, I had these resources around me, and this is what I can negotiate to serve the movement. And in this space, it looks a little different, and in this space, it looks a little different, but the purpose behind it is always the same. So in some ways, it's less of a like linear journey and more of a like, you get to where you are, you see what can I extract, what can I use, how can I disrupt the institution that I'm within, the space that I'm within, and give what I can to the movement at this point and in this space. So yeah, I think that's a bit of me.
No, that's I'm going to keep saying that's incredibly powerful, but I'm saying it because I really mean it. And I think what you've all spoken to, which has been really powerful, and I think what makes this a space that feels enriching in that is that the collective is where we always have to go back to and always have to be able to rest in. I think in this decolonization work, and I think this is something that universities can't grasp, and that's why they're in their own sort of crisis with trying to tackle they're like trying to get into a space where they can decolonize. It's that they don't recognize that this work isn't to further one individual, further one person, or for the liberation of one. Deco looks for the liberation of all when you actually look at it in its essence. You know, Deco is intersectional, Deco is internationalist, and Deco really looks to the collective in really looking at how we can, I'll quote again, grasp at the root of all of these persisting issues, whether it's racial violence or gendered violence or any sort of violence that we see in our society today. It really looks to grasp at the root and uproot that. And I think something that's not spoken enough about actually is that decolonization isn't just about the uprooting, but it's also about the rebuilding. And that's really, really important, that when we do this work, I think we've spent so much time having to dig and uproot. And I think what's really interesting now, especially because our whole world has been shaken by Miss Rona, we have to mention her at some point, you know, there's now fertile ground where we can start planting those seeds, when we can start, you know, building something that looks different, that looks radical, that looks like something that we've never even been given the space to imagine or create before, but now we can. And so that takes me on to my next question, which it feels really general, but I think all of you have highlighted specific parts of your sort of parts in this. But I really wanted to speak about, you know, what does decolonization look like in practice in the spaces that you are all in? So obviously Larissa and I are in you know, the national level of the student movement, where we're doing all of these things, fighting MPs, but also decolonizing spaces, doing our organizing work. But all of this links together. So I'd really love to see what you are doing in your spaces to see decolonization happening in practice, and really breaking out of the boxes that people have tried to create for decolonization, and actually serving what you can with the tools, like Larissa said, the tools that you have to give. So I'm going to go to, I'm not sure who I want to go to first. This feels like a cool game. I'm going to go to Shayon, because I think your arm is reaching out.
Yeah, I was just good because I couldn't stretch it. I was like, let me just go first. Yeah, what are we doing? Calm. So again, as I said, Durham is a very weird space where everything has to go through some sort of process, which is good and bad for many reasons. But something that we're doing this year, and that has been approved, and something that's going to happen this year, is that we're hiring departmental decolonization interns. So these are students that can apply for these internships that will be paid, and they are co-creators of their education. So they work with academics, under academics, beside academics, and sometimes in oversight groups where they unpick the methodology, the philosophy, the pedagogy of the entire curriculum for that year, or just a module for that year, and they are as invested as they are recipients of that education. So it's good for so many different reasons. It's a way for students to engage in their education, not just passively consume it. It's good to keep academics accountable, and everybody in that space, as I said, disseminating the responsibility to everybody. And also the labor is paid for as well. So the university is like opening their pockets to provide this. So it shows like an actual commitment, a financial commitment, especially in these financial times. Like for us to get our university to get on board with this and sell that idea shows that like they're invested in it as well, which means that there's a legacy and it can be inherited by generations and generations of students, rather than like, this is what we're doing for the year. And when we go, Decol still has that, like, as I said, like revolutionary spirit. And it also gives the university this weird indirect, I mean, it's not something that I'm particularly invested in, but like the weird indirect taking responsibility of its colonial past, right? So if you hire students, if you invest in their labor, if you make their labor hyper visible, what you're doing is that you're doing a weird type of like I don't know, like remuneration type process where they are the new faces of your curriculum, of your academia. So I think it's a really good program, and it's awesome, and it's allowing students to articulate what they think decolonize is, rather than also being spoken to. So like they can come to me and I can tell them what I think it is, but also like it's not static as well. Like all I can say is destruction, reconstruction, and the observation of institutionalized violence, but that can mean so many different things, and that's for them to infuse into their education. So that's what we're doing at Durham University. Next.
That sounds so good. I'm gonna go into Fozia next, to speak about what you're doing with kids of color, or just in general life with decolonization. It's wherever you're operating.
Thank you. And I love that energy. But yeah, so with kids of color, there are two kind of main roles that we play, because we work with young people of color. We've kind of created a space that is a non-colonial space for them, and it's somewhere for them to be present and be how they are, so, and how they want, and whatever form that comes in. And because it started off with young people telling their stories, expressing their stories, and then kind of delving into that in kind of whichever route that took, that's still one of the main platforms for them. But in the process of working with all these different young people of color came challenging these systems that have created a lot of the difficulties that they face, the experiences that they have gone through. So as much as we work with them and have given them a platform, a space, and an organization to be in, to not internalize those stigmas, those stereotypes, the kind of invisibility that they are made to believe in, we also go into those spaces to challenge that. So we have anti-racist workshops in schools. We do teacher training where we challenge these ideologies, we challenge these system structures. And as much as we would love to like walk in, change policies, close down certain schools, these are the steps that we can take, are taking, but also are making changes in the spaces that these kids are predominantly in when they're in schools. And having teachers and other schools reach out and come forward is process and like productive and positive, as it has, as they're the ones that are with these kids, they're the ones that can create a safer space and a more open dialogue about these contexts that aren't discussed in schools. So we have that, and then one of the main recent campaigns that we did is the No Policing in Schools, because of the summer of the Freedom Information Act coming forward saying that they'll place 20 more police officers in schools in Manchester, all in working class and predominantly people of color schools. That created the campaign. And there's been a whole history of, as we all know, like violence of police and how they treat and other young people of color, but predominantly Black students. And we have the same emotions and stories and pain that these young kids experience on school premises. So that's how the campaign came about. And it was really good in the sense that we had almost 600 participants come forward and do surveys. We had young people, we had parents, we had teachers, we had the Teachers Union Conference come forward and state that they are a part of this and that they want this and they're siding with this campaign and that they don't want schools, police in their schools. So all these different actions and all these different relationships that we have with some teachers in schools and stuff make forms of difference in the spaces that these young people of color are in, and the relationships and the challenges and difficulties that they're facing. And it's also really positive for them to have their teachers come forward to be on their side. And I think them publicly seeing that and seeing how much the campaign has come forward, the fact that communities were unaware and then made it their business when they were aware, there was a lot of movement from that. And I think that gives a lot of progression and a lot of hope for these young people of color specifically. So that's the sort of relations of things that kids of color do, and the different lanes that we go into.
I think that's really, really incredible, especially because reflecting off of everything you said, I think anytime we're not speaking about higher education, everybody thinks that decolonization outside of higher education is just like, all like, let's make the curriculum diverse, like let's you know, speak about less Tudor and speak about another type of history. But the reality is that the environment of education is still, you know, part of that decolonization process as much as the curriculum and as those other sort of more talked about components are. And so I think that's incredibly great work, and work that it's good to see so many people engaging with. And Larissa, I come to you finally because I can talk about you and the work that you do in NUS, but also you're part of the Free Black University team, and you guys are just doing such phenomenal work in that space. And so, you know, you've been in this for a long time, so it would be good to see what you've been doing, and if you want to highlight NUS, you can too. But yeah, it would be good to see what you're doing and how that's happening in practice where you are.
I can definitely kick us off talking about NUS, but please jump in if there's anything that I miss. Because, you know, fundamentally, I really see, and I think we see the role of NUS as empowering students at the grassroots to be doing the work of decolonization, and I guess creating the spaces where we can kind of collectively hold one another's feet to the fire in terms of staying true to the radical tenets of this work. But then also providing like the tools, the resources, the language, etc., that people need, and that help not only us, I guess, but also kind of the next set of students who come through and often have to start from the ground up and actually saying, actually, no, these are the things that the people who came before you, the people who are now passing on the baton, created such that you can continue on this movement. So I think that's one of the kind of core important things that I see NUS is doing, but also, and that's quite like us as a student movement, but also I think building these links to Black and brown folks across grassroots organisations, across trade unions, other spaces and organisers whose purpose aligns with ours, because I think so often when we're talking about decolonising education, that gets really siloed, but like how can we also be building links into other parts of society, other folks who are doing this work as well, and learning from and creating those spaces of shared learning, shared knowledge production, not only with students, but with all the other people who have this insight and this lens as well. So I guess, I don't know, in terms of what we're doing with and for students, I guess it's about supporting SUs, supporting SAB, supporting student organisers, to I guess partake in what, when I was talking about negotiating with the institution, I was actually remembered like what I was trying to say, which is Fred Moten's quote about theft from the institution. And I guess we're kind of trying to be the chief thieves, like we're just trying to give people the I don't know, to give people the encouragement they need to like, actually, this is about partaking in theft from this institution. It's about, you know, seeing what can we take from this space that is going to serve our community and our liberation and the movement to decolonize. So yeah, I guess that's one of the ways I might describe it. And yeah, I'm so excited about that work. And as I say, Hilary, if I've missed anything or if there's nothing I've covered, please jump in, because otherwise I'll just ramble on and talk a bit about FBU. Because yeah, outside of, or I guess adjacent to the work of NUS, I'm a small part of the team at FBU, the Free Black University. And so we're really working to build a hub of transformative knowledge production that's not only, it's built by and for us, right? It's directly for Black people, but not, you know, in this broad sense. We're kind of like outspokenly centered in Black feminism. It's predominantly Black LGBTQ+ folks who are leading this, Mel's our founder, is incredible. Check out their work and everything that they say, because honestly, I just learn the whole time that I'm around Mel's. And this is really about thinking like, scrap everything that we know about universities and what they look like and how they are constructed. And if we go from the point of just ground zero, like what would education, what would knowledge look like if it was built by us and for us, and what could we create in terms of physical space, but also, you know, something that is about our healing, it's about our collective care, that is about, you know, really pouring into our communities. And I just, it's honestly beautiful. Doing that work is beautiful. Being around the other people doing that work is beautiful. And it just feels like a gift to get to do it. So yeah, check out the Free Black Uni. We've got our e-library, and it's just free resources about transformative knowledge. So check it out. Small plug.
Yeah, I think all of that has been I need to find other adjectives, because like, for me, being in this space and actually being in a space with other Black women listening to this, I think has just been so enriching, because like I think it shows a diversity of actions, and not diversity in the way universities use it, but diversity of actions in which we can all play our part in this decolonization work, but still remain authentic to the purpose of why we're doing it, and that shared purpose continues to bring us together as a collective. So I think that's really, really incredible. And you know, speaking about what NUS is doing in our campaign, we're making sure that we're holistically supporting and galvanizing and bringing together people in all different, you know, streams rather of decolonization, and actually thinking about how we can build that collective so the work can be done collectively, so nobody ever feels that they're doing it by themselves, but we actually bring together the authentic you know, the authentic collective that decolonization inherently calls for and is. And so I think that's just amazing to hear what you're all doing in your spaces, and really think, especially for the attendees here, really think about how you can play your part in the most authentic way to you and the tools you have. And so for the final question of this panel, before we go into the Q&A, I was just reflecting on a lot of what you were saying, and actually thinking about going on from thinking about the collective. I think the collective is always going to be important, because in my own personal sort of journey with decolonization, I think what I've always had to wrestle with, especially now that I'm in a space where I'm doing it so actively, it's not just me learning, I'm actively in the space where it's like, I can go to work and say I'm doing decolonization explicitly, and nobody will be like, how do you do decolonization in like a factory or something like that? Like, I think it's really important to think about how humanity plays a big role in decolonization. And I speak about humanity because I feel that, especially over Black History Month, but just in general, when I go into spaces to speak about decolonization, or when decolonization is being talked about in spaces that I happen to be in, I think sometimes people take away the human aspect of it to the point where, you know, decolonization just becomes a concept and not, you know, not a movement, a practice, a mindset that inherently is thinking about people. It's thinking about people. It's thinking about the world around people. It's thinking about the world that is built for people to live in, and for people to exist in. And I really, really think about that, especially when we're thinking about the collective, and how we engage people. And that's a lot of what we think about at NUS, how we engaging people with this work, how we getting people to really buy into decolonization in a way that really empowers them to action. And so I really want to hear from all of you, and this will be my final question before we go into the Q&A. In this decolonization work, what are the approaches that you have taken to really engage people, to really win over those hearts and minds, and pull people to action? And I don't know if I've ever heard that question being asked in that way. So maybe I've created a new question that can be used everywhere, no trademark. But like, you know, what has been the ways that you have brought together that collective action and galvanized it? And this time I'm going to start with Larissa, actually. And then we'll go from there. So Larissa, go ahead.
You know, I think this is so interesting. And disclaimer, like I didn't really see the questions before, like 2 minutes before we started. So sorry if this is a little bit jumbled, but I think, you know, it's interesting that we're talking about like bringing together hearts and minds, because I almost feel like, particularly when we're centering Black folks and other non-Black people of color, I feel like when you know, when I was saying that for my journey, I can pinpoint those Black feminists who really poured into me and taught me, like, it's almost like I was calling out for that space. It's almost like I knew what I was moving towards, but I didn't have the language, I didn't have the tools, I didn't have what I needed to really do the work in a way that was you know, centered in it's in what it actually is and its roots. And so I've always felt like at every stage of opening up space and really holding space for conversations about dreaming, about decolonization and what that means and how we do it, I don't feel like I've ever had to like bring people on board. It's more been about like, how do we create the space and create the conditions within which people feel able to do that work, or feel that they have access to the language and resources that they need, and all of those other things. It doesn't feel like I have to convince people. Like once you have access to the text, once you have access to all of the literature, to that, like I just feel like it's just, the more that you dive into it, the more that you're pulled in. Not that you have to bring people in, but they are pulled in, because it's like, this is what I've been looking for, like, or at least that's what it felt like to me. That every time I was reading stuff about decolonization, like when I was first at the beginnings of my journey, like I remember being like, wow, like that literally makes sense. Like we have to do that. Like let's just do it. And I've always been a very scrappy organizer, so I'd be like, let's do it right now. Like so yeah, I feel like that's always been very much the energy. It's never felt like I have to be like, well, maybe you should think about it like this. Like it's has never been like that. And yeah, I think that for me, that's about creating spaces where we're doing the decolonization work, but where we're also centering Black joy and Black rest and Black collective care. Because once you've paired those two things together, the organizing work, but also the care, like I think that once you've built the space and held the space and created the conditions under which people have the resources or whatever to do that work, like it never feels like calling people in, it just feels like calling people home to a thing that they already knew that they needed. So yeah, that's a bit of me.
Wow, again, incredible. I think that's so important. And I can actually reflect on that a lot, because I think I've had my own reckoning with actually, like I feel sometimes that I wake up and I'm like, wait, I'm doing, like, how did I get here? Like how am I here? Like what happened? And I think about it, and you're right, you do get drawn in. There is something that, like, you know, the more you learn, the more you actually understand, the more you get drawn to the spaces where you need to be to continue to grow and develop in this space. And so I'm going to go on to Fosia, and especially because you know, when I was growing up, my mum always used to say this to me, and I think it's because of our faith, but also because of you know, how she was brought up. You know, when you teach people something from when they're young, they tend to hold on to that and take that with them throughout their lives. And you are working with people that are still in the space where they can learn and hold on to the things that you are enabling them to grasp onto. So please do tell us how you've drawn people into this space and enabled them to come and feel free here.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, that was really beautiful, Larissa. And I feel I really resonated with that. I felt really the same. I mean, like I said, when I opened Malcolm X's book, I was like, this is the beginning. Like it really, like I was like, this is it, I know it. And it really is, I think it's remarkable, because seeing how Kids of Color has gone, starting off, it was just the founder, Roxy, with her camera, speaking to young people and giving them a platform and listening to them, like really hearing what they had to say. And then through that, it's kind of traveled, and we've had open spaces and events, and where young people would speak, and then the professional in that space. So for example, when we had mental health and people of color in mental health, we had myself and a young Black man who spoke, and then 2 women of color who were in the mental health profession. And you see how these young people like volunteer themselves. They want to speak, and they have this power within them where it's like, I have something to say and I will say it now and everyone will listen. And you just see how just by having this space, a space that hasn't been infected by any form of oppression or colonization, gives them such strength and such freedom and such identity. And it's really beautiful to see, like you were saying, like these young minds and the impact that it has to just bring them to life by acknowledging their existence and telling them and teaching them of their history. Kids of Color does this bookshelf where every 2 months they send over a variety of different books, and these kids get to learn all these different knowledge and all these different stories and context that they don't get in school. And then they come back and they take over. They have things that they want to do. And it never felt like pleading or begging or pulling to any of those people in the space. Very similar to what Larissa was saying. We've had events and, you know, Roxy would be very nervous, and then you see all these people from the community come, and after the speakers have spoken at the events, you see all these participation of parents, other young people who have been inspired. You see young Black men share stories and thoughts where they wouldn't have before. They're not trying to impress anybody. They're just being honest, and all these people in one space. And though at times the content of conversation isn't the easiest of topics, it's still so beautiful to see such power. And I think that's really what I've experienced through my job at Kids of Color. And personally myself, I was just seeking this whole time, and when I found it, I've kind of been addicted to it ever since, and it's like a continuous process. You know, and that's kind of how I've personally experienced it and how I've seen it. I think for a lot of us, it's not about being pulled in, it's just finally finding the place and then existing.
Again, yeah, just so many, like, just listening to you speak, it actually brought something back home for me, and it's actually something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I found myself saying it in spaces, and I think it's actually just clicked how important it is that sometimes it's not about you know, making spaces so people can come, but it's instead, you know, giving people the ability to create those spaces in which they feel they are called home. And I think that is so incredible, and I think it's a testament to know that, like, none of this work that we're doing is in vain, because even if one person comes to it, or even if one person engages, that's one more person that has come home, that has found somewhere that they can just exist and not have to, you know, be all of these things that living in a violent society causes us to constantly have to adjust and shift to. And this takes us nicely on to Shaun, and what you're doing as a student leader to really call people home and get them to really engage in the ways that are most true and authentic to themselves.
Before I say that, can we just talk about the bar of a space that has not been infected by any type of oppression? Is that just, sorry, I had to give that a moment, because I feel that so heavily, and I feel like I've never been in a space like that. Like, honestly, God, I don't think I've ever been in a space like that. Like, my parents are both hyper-religious people, and I can't think of a political, a religious, a class-based, or any type of space that I occupy that has not been infected by oppression. And I felt like that really resonated with my spirit really quickly. So I just want to give props where props is due. Also, the term student leader, I'm not Hillary and Larissa, like that is like seriousness. I'm very much like, I'm literally trying to get to the end. I'm joking. I don't know. I think so. In Durham, as a point of reference, it's a hyper middle to upper class white exclusive elitist space, and I think in terms of like bringing people in, I've never been the one to like care about that, I guess, because everybody around me is people that they would have to do a lot of, you know, fundamental unpacking, and I know that like that's not my job. Do you know what I mean? Like my sister always says, like it's one battle, many frontiers, and all of us have roles in this revolution. And mine is to articulate where I am from an academic perspective, and other people's is to teach. And I know I'm not a teacher, just based on like temperament, and also like God did not give me that talent, so I'm not a teacher in that space. So in terms of bringing people in, I'm always around like upper middle class white people. So it's something that I have to reckon with, to be like, okay, listen, am I going to sacrifice my integrity to, I don't know, like black splain oppression or like white splain oppression to white people? Like, I don't know if I'm willing to do that. I don't know if I have the energy to do that. Also, at the same time, these are the only people that I have at my disposal. So is my conversation now about white allies and how do I bring them in? And it's a constant cyclical type of arrangement and engagement that a lot of us, especially people of color and black women and black people in like very sore and raw situations are in. So I think the only way that I can talk to this is how I see the conversation developing through a scope that is accessible, and how I see that is through class warfare. So when we talk about decolonize, I always like, I love talking about black people and Africa and, you know, and race is central to that. But this is ultimately about global class oppression. And that's the only way I can access it. So like Fozia was talking about Malcolm X being your first book, my first reference would be Das Kapital. Like my references are through a socialist circumvention that I think is more accessible, and it's also very accessible for not only my white allies but also for people of color that are trying to have this conversation on a more meta level. So I would say that how I bring them in is talk about, like, I centralize words like oppression, I centralize words like violence, I talk about institutions, talk about structures, like we're from unions, do you know what I mean? I talk about unionization, collective action, and collective power. I talk about like the gander rather than the goose. Like it's in a lens that is a bit more like Marx than Marx. I feel like because the fundamentals to all of this is Marx, so it's not even in comparison. Like at the end of the day, we're all looking for revolution, and that's what's going to happen, and in one form or another. So that's how I bring people to the conversation, but also that's how I navigate my way through that conversation, so I don't get fatigued by having to talk about like myself, because I'm a working class black woman, but what is immediate to everybody is my blackness. And sometimes that is not the hat that I'm wearing that day. Sometimes I'm wearing my woman hat, or sometimes I wear my intersectional hat, or sometimes I'm wearing my class hat. But that is a barrier that people don't want to digest. So the way that I encapsulate all those things and the way that I emphasize my intersectionality is through class. So that is how I do that, I guess. I don't know if that was eloquent enough, but that's an answer to the question.
No, I think it was eloquent, and I think it's important that like this is the thing, isn't it? It's like there's no one route into this, and there's not one way to do this. And I think it's important that in recognizing, again, I'm reclaiming diversity in its true sense, in recognizing the diversity of how we can actually do this in the ways that work together to bring the purpose of what we're doing together, but allows us to do it in the ways and in the spaces that we feel most accustomed to and empowered in, is the ways that we get this work going in its most authentic and true way, that really allows people to be seen and not invisibilized or homogenized into what people might want to put them into to work in this space. And I think that's really, really important. So we've had such great insight from all of you tonight, and I think, you know, people already have a lot that they're going to go home with, but you know, right now I just want to open the floor to anybody that has any questions to ask our three amazing panelists. They have a wealth of knowledge to share, and I'm sure you know, you recognize that this is a safe space, so please do ask your questions. in a respectful way, but be candid and ask what you want to know. And I know we've already got 2 questions in the Q&A function, and I'm going to ask it, and whoever feels most drawn to answering the question, unmute yourself and talk to it. So the first question that we got is, do you feel the media has tainted the word radical in the context that it is always applied to terrorism or extremist ideology? Whoever feels that they want to answer that, please feel free. And I can give a preamble of an answer, but of course, our wonderful audience are here to hear from you. Sharon?
Me? I thought Larissa would be the best person to answer this one, because I feel like
I
you're
see your arm.
exposed. No, I was going to do it because I was like, Larissa, in your own time, can you unmute so you can answer this question? If not, I'll answer it, but I feel like you're best suited to answer this one.
Okay, I can try to start an answer. Maybe we can cobble something together between us. I mean, I think even the question of language is an interesting one, because, you know, people attach to language what they will, right? If that's the context in which people are choosing, and the lens through which people are choosing to see radical, when there is so much explanation of what we mean when we say that. Like, similarly, it's like radical gets, I think, in a way appropriated when we're talking about TERFs and when we're calling out TERFs, but that's not the associate. Do you know what I mean? Like, language is what we make of it and what we attach to it. So I'm almost, because I'm a linguist by nature, so I study Hispanic studies. So I'm almost attacking the question from a linguist angle, which is why, Shane, I feel like you'll do it more justice from an actual political science perspective. But I think it's so easy to get caught up in the language of what we're talking about. And to me, the more interesting thing is, what are we doing? And if you look at what we're doing when we're talking about, you know, a radical approach, or it's not even a radical approach, because decolonization in and of itself has to be radical. There's no option. There's no decolonized light. There's no decolonized minus addition. Like, it's just like, it is what it is. And colonization is so violent. I think it's a very nice word for talking about what we actually are talking about, which is, you know, extraction and violence and theft and all like, even more things I don't even want to speak to, because you know, my heart, I'm not ready to get into a heavy place. But my point being, like, the language is what we make of it, and to me the important thing is what we make of it. But Shane, please, Hillary, please, Fozia, please, everyone jump in. Tell me what your thoughts are.
No, I completely agree, but I don't know, I think we do this thing, I don't know if it's a Black person thing or if it's a person of color thing or it's just an oppressed person thing, but we put a lot of faith into institutions that are inherently constructed to, like, kill us. So, like, the media is not, has never been our friend. I'm very confused about what this is. Like, the only media that has ever been the friend of any revolutionary movement is, like, dispossessed media or, like, democratized media. So if the media you're talking about is mainstream media and saying that they have, like, misappropriated the word radical to, like, a terrorist or whatever, like, that's what they're supposed to do. Like, they don't owe anything to us. So I feel like our original faith in the media to, like, have the facts presented correctly and not to, you know, not to allocate things, and it's like, what? That's like saying I have faith in Boris that he'll feed our kids. It's like, but why? Like, he was not bred to be productive to the movement that is my movement, that is for their destruction. So decolonization is about the destruction of institutions that were made for colonial purposes. Is the media not also one of those institutions? Are we not taking it from a holistic approach? So if the media is talking about radicals as in, like, radicals are terrorists, or, like, we're overexerting, then that's cool, keep it pushing. But, like, I'm not looking for you to be the spokesperson of my movement. I'm looking for the people to be the spokesperson of my movement. Do you know what I mean? Like, if Larissa and Hillary and Fozia are disagreeing with mainstream media saying about radicals, then I have 2 options here: to listen to people who are sensible and people that I admire, or listen to an institution that is built up to discredit my revolutionary spirit. So I'll choose option A over option B. So that's weird. Like, it's kind of like when Boris was like, not even Boris, Keir, all of these people, let me keep it non-partisan, please, let me not get in trouble. But all these people, when they were like, Black Lives Matter, you know, I love it, but and I was like, I'm so sorry, were you there at the beginning stages? If you are not, keep it pushing. I'm not asking you, like, can we ask the sensible peoples? Can we ask the Black feminists, please? Because you're the only people that I can trust what's coming out of your mouth. Like, if I can't trust you to take care of your own, how can I trust you to take care of me and my own language? So I have no faith into the mainstream media personally. They can call radical whatever they want to call it, because I know it's not true. Like, it's not in the history book. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
Yeah, I think that's it. Fauzi, do you want to speak?
I just wanted to add, I mean, that was brilliant. I loved it. But I completely agree with both the girls. There was a moment where one of these like men in one of the schools that we needed to go to kind of communicated that kids of color is radical. It's just too extreme for these spaces. And it started this sort of conversation. And I was just like, it's like, what does that mean, right? And it's like, it's no offense, because it's like, it's you, you know? So it's like understanding that. So I just wanted to like put my 2 cents in that I agree, basically.
Yeah, like everything that's been said, I can't add anything to that. Like, the definition of radical that I use is the one that is centered on our decolonization work. You know, radical simply means grasping at the root. And so any other definition anybody has is not for me. Go to your Webster's dictionary, it's not ours. But the next question here is, what do you think the main barriers are for, in brackets, white people to fully engage with decolonization? Interesting question. Who wants to take it?
I'll give a one-word answer: whiteness. Is that acceptable to respond? Is that enough?
Yeah. No, I think that is an answer in itself. Do you want to expand on it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I can, like, fundamentally, like whiteness as a thing, and like it's just always going to be at odds with this work, because it's like, how, like, there's so much to reckon with. There is so much to reckon with, and that's not like, Shane, I love what you said earlier, like, that's not my problem. Like, it's genuinely not really my problem to be dealing with. And like, I don't know if a white person, I'm assuming a white person asks this, like, for you and yours, like, I don't know, like, there are so many barriers, and all of which are so inherently tied into the ways that whiteness just is always going to be at odds with this work, and the ways that, you know, white supremacy and the complicity in white supremacy it's never going to allow white people to fully understand this work, because it's so rooted in, you know, radical Black work. Like, I can't conceptualize a white person ever being able to engage with this work in the same way. And I think we just have to, like, that's just full stop, period. Like, that's it. That's why I said that it's a one-word answer for me, because I think the question is phrased interestingly, in that it just says, like, what are the barriers? Like, that is the barrier. Like, I feel like I don't have more to add.
No, I think you've explained it perfectly. Sharon, do you want to say something? Or Fozia, you've unmuted. Go ahead.
I realized I'm pointing, but you couldn't see my finger. Yeah, okay, sure. I'll speak. Yeah, I very much agree with what Larissa was saying, and I also feel like there's a difference between the barrier and discomfort, right? Like, you can be uncomfortable and still be anti-racist. I feel like for the fact that there's a barrier, then it's a level of whiteness where it's, you know, I'm not in a place where, for me and my work and what I do, I don't prioritize that. Like, I don't, like, kind of what we were talking about before, of like pulling people into like the decolonial spaces. There's no we don't do that, because a lot of people, like, this is what they want, need, and are empowered by. So I feel like having to pull you in takes the energy out of me of what I need to be doing in the spaces and being present there. So I feel that's, if there's a barrier, there's a problem, and it's a separate problem to the problems we're dealing with, if that makes sense. And I think that in, you know, light of social media and what's been happening recently, there's a lot of excuses of like, oh, because it's uncomfortable and because it's difficult and blah, 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 that's why I can't. And it's like, that's not an excuse. I've been uncomfortable most of my life in England, still got on with it. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's really, it's kind of that, understanding that thought and what are your intentions through that.
Sharon, do you want to say anything?
Again, another round of bars. I completely agree. In terms of whiteness, I think it's really interesting that this, and personally, I don't even know if it was a white person or a person of color who wrote this. Like, I can't read that from it, but like putting it in quotes, I think is quite interesting, and it kind of leads to what we always talk about, like decentralizing the white gaze and the white locus from decolonization, right? But I also think that there is an element of like necessary centralization of the white gaze, but not as our focal point, not as our lens, but as the root and heart of violence itself. So to put whiteness in a quote is to be like, these people are white in this context, and this context of decolonization alone. But outside of this context, when it's our everyday mainstream life, they're just people. But that's not fair, because in decolonization, we're still identified as Black women, but also in the mainstream context, we're Black women as well. Like, we don't have the privilege of taking away that, like, that qualification of our personhood or of our humanity. But white people in this are, again, pacifying their involvement. And I think it's about, obviously, in the sensible sense of diversification, it's about like including as many people of color voices as possible. But I also think it's about who are the perpetrators of violence. Like, question, we always talk about rape culture. We also about, sorry, trigger warning, but we also about rape culture and victims of sexual assault, and like the victims, how do we help the victims? And 100% our resources should go to be helping those victims. But also, what is the context and the environment that has victimized this person? Because if we deconstruct the culture, if we deconstruct the environment, then those victims will not exist. And I don't like it when we always go, okay, how do we get more people of color in the room? How do we do this? But what if the room itself is toxic? How do we destroy the room? How do we burn the room down? And who is responsible for curating that room? My thing is, let's look at the responsibility, who's responsible, because I can only look at the responsible people and purge them before I can start rebuilding the system and the culture I want to rebuild. Like, I think that, like, and obviously it gets into very revolutionary, like French Revolution, like, so let's not go in that territory. But I do think there needs to be a reckoning where it's like, listen, I have been a victim all my life. Why are we not pointing to the people that have victimized me? Because I had no agency, and now I have agency. I still need to look back to the people that had agency. And I do think with white people, they have this weird talent. I can only call it a talent, because if I start calling it nefarious, please, I go to a white school, let me not die, let me get through my tenure and we'll see. But it's this weird talent of being like, but what about me? How do I help? How do I do this? And I'm always looking at you like you're so greedy, like you want everything. You want to be at the center of my oppression, but also at the center of my liberation. Like, what is that? Like, I just think it's very greedy to be like, but what about white people? Yeah, what about you? Like, I'm sorry, but the only way that I can see you coming into this is your apology. And even then, I'm just gonna take it for face value. Like, I'm gonna be like, cool, keep it moving, let's rebuild. And we'll see if you can enter this new society that I'm trying to rebuild. Like, I think it's very much like, when we talk about white people, I think we take it on a case-by-case basis. Oh, that's a lie, I take it back. I think if we want to talk about white people, we need to talk about it structurally and be like, structurally and as a group, as a collective, you're responsible for all this stuff. So if you and I want to come in and do what about we, more me, I have to also look at you and your structure, because I was looking at my structure. I was called a Black person before I was identified as Sean Twins. So before I can call you Sally Mae, I have to also see you're identified as a white person. And I feel like we need to, sorry, I'm rambling, but I feel like we also need to, like, when I talk about being scared or being like words that are palatable, I feel like we need to stop being scared to say white people. Like, you're a white person, like, it's fine. Like, the same way that Boris can be like, on Black History Month, we also need to be like, and the white people, like, we also need to give that same energy, because we need to understand that your position here is very unusual. Like, it was not inevitable that you became the center of the the center of the imperial project. Like, it's not a coincidence. There were active decisions, and there were agents, and there was activity, there was agency that created this scenario that I'm in, that I'm a victim from. So we also need to look at that agency and be like, okay, what were the decisions that you made? Because we always like to be like, you profit off of privilege. No, I'm so sorry, you're a perpetrator. Sorry, and that's fine. And I think we need to be comfortable to say that, because we're comfortable of highlighting violence when it's been inflicted on us, but we never look at the people that are inflicting. And it's, as you said, Foja, so greatly, like, it might be uncomfortable, but I'm so sorry, you need to displace yourself. And that is growing pains, and it's painful, but so was slavery, and so was genocide, and so was femicide. So I'm not saying that we need to do that, because again, please, let me just get through this tenure, but I'm saying it's looking a bit techie for you still. So again, take the quotes off. Let's call you white people. Let's call it for what it is. If we want to call it racism, we want to call it violence, we want to call it rape culture. Let's also call them white people as well. Whew, me, I'm going to be voting no confidence.
Oh gosh, that was, yeah, I think that more than answered that question. And that actually brings us to the end of our time. But I'm sure that there's going to be more spaces. Like, look, I know it's getting to the end of Black History Month, but Black people don't stop existing after Black History Month. So please, we are still here. We're still doing the work. We're still out here, you know, working hard. So please, like, this is an ongoing thing. Please still engage, and please still make sure that, like, you know, in this space, you don't just lose interest and then come back next October and ask us to do this again, because like it's being done and it's continuing. So that leads me to say, like, first of all, a massive thank you to all of our panelists here today. I mean, like, it's been a long year. It's been a long life, but you know, you all being here and really speaking to decolonization in practice, speaking to the importance of doing this work in the personal capacity, but also in the institutional and societal capacity, and worldly capacity, even what society, the world capacity, it is really, really important, and it's been great to hear. And so I think if you want to continue to follow the work that is going on, I'm sure all of our panelists have social media, and that will probably be tagged in all of our NUS live tweeting and all of that cool stuff that's been happening behind the scenes. And also don't forget to make sure that you're engaging with the Decolonization in Practice conference, which is still ongoing, and there's lots of incredible events to happen. I'm speaking tomorrow if you want to come and hear me speak. Finally, engage with the NUS decolonization campaign, which is ongoing, and there's lots of really, really important, interesting, empowering things coming up. So keep updated with what we're doing. But that just leaves me to say, stay safe, stay well, continue to fight this good fight, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, and good night. Panelists, if you can stay for a second. But bye everybody else.